Hello, everybody. This is Tony from Surfskate Science, and we're super excited to have Shane and Cassie here from Nova. And they're going to teach us today a little bit about coral reefs and restoration. While they're speaking and sharing their video, just keep yourself muted. And then afterwards, you'll all have a chance to ask questions. If you have questions that you think of while they're going through, you can always put them in the chat box, and we'll try to get them to answer all your questions, okay? So with that, Shane and Cassie, you can go ahead and start.
How's it going, everybody? My name is Shane Weaver, and I am a marine biologist and a research diver here at Nova Southeastern. I work with Cassie in the CRRAM Lab. So CRRAM basically means Coral Reef Restoration Assessment and Monitoring, which is a bunch of big words for we look at corals and we tell people if they're healthy, if they're sick, how they're feeling, how they're doing, and all kinds of different information about them. So Cassie, would you like to say hi to everybody?
Hi, everyone. My name's Cassie. I'm a research associate at the CRRAM Lab at NSU. So our lab, like Shane said, we do a lot of stuff with coral, kind of looking at them over long time periods, and then reporting that information to different organizations who make decisions about, coral reefs and what to do with helping them. So our lab, we do a lot of field-based work, which essentially means that we're out diving on the reefs on the coast of Florida. So we get a lot of opportunity to look at corals and kind of check out and see how things are doing over long periods of time, which is really exciting. So we don't do a ton of laboratory work, which if you guys have been to NSU, you might have seen some tanks where they store coral colonies and other stuff. A lot of our labs at NSU also do that kind of work, but our stuff is primarily out in the ocean itself. So we're going to go through today talking about coral reefs, where they are, kind of why they're important to us as human beings, and then how we're helping the reefs recover from some different types of threats that have been causing some issues. So we'll get going. So like I said, our lab does a lot of long-term monitoring of corals. So corals, as you guys can see from these photos, they can come in all different types of shapes, all different types of colors. So when we're talking about coral reefs, we're talking about reefs that are built up by coral structures. So they can host a whole diversity of other organisms, like you guys can see here. There are a ton of different fish species, invertebrates like jellyfish and lobsters, and also a bunch of different larger animals like, sea turtles, sharks, whales, and dolphins that all kind of rely on these coral reef ecosystems. So they're very important to our world, essentially, but especially to our oceans. They provide a lot of services that Shane's going to go into a little later. But as you guys can see, coral reefs are found all over the world in these different highlighted areas. We're really lucky in Florida that we have coral reefs on the Atlantic coast, kind of right off our doorstep. And a lot of the services and other organizations rely on the coral reefs for a lot of different things that are important to our economy. So whether that be fishing, tourism, or that kind of things. So, living in Florida, we have a really great opportunity in that we can kind of see these reefs pretty consistently, which is great.
How to get out? Okay, I want to make it louder.
So when we're talking about coral reefs, we're talking about corals. So I'm going to open this question up. If you guys in the chat, what do you guys think corals are? So when I say coral, what is the first things that comes to your head? Is it a rock? Is it a plant? Is it an animal? Is it something else? Go ahead in the chat and kind of write what you think a coral is. I'll give you guys a minute to do that. All right, a few more seconds for anyone. Who hasn't answered yet? Alrighty, so good job, everybody. Corals are actually a combination of kind of all three of these things. So if you answered any of those different things, you got this question right. So corals are made up of a couple different organisms. So the main structure of a coral, Shane, if you don't mind hitting, yeah, there we go, is called a coral polyp. So if you guys see on the picture to the left here, that is what is called a polyp. Essentially, it kind of just looks like an upside down jellyfish, almost as if the jellyfish was sitting on the bottom and attached to the bottom and its tentacles were up into the ocean itself. So these polyps, with their little tentacles, help feed the actual coral organism. And a bunch of polyps connected together form a coral colony. And then within the coral, within the polyp, if you guys see on the picture on the right, there are a bunch of little tiny algae. So algae are plants that live in water systems, so in our ocean. And these algae live inside the actual coral tissue itself. So algae, like a lot of other plants, get their energy from the sun through photosynthesis. So while these algae are photosynthesizing, they're creating energy, and then that energy can actually be fed to the coral polyp, while the coral polyp provides the algae a home, essentially, and keeps it safe and protected from anything out in the environment. So while these polyps are animals, and they also have plants living inside their tissues, these polyps also create a skeleton underneath their tissue. So that skeleton can actually build up over time and create the reefs that we see today. So a lot of the reefs are actually made out of coral skeletons that have built up and built up and built up over time to create these large structures that we can see today.
Okay, now that we know what a coral actually is, it's time to talk about why they're important. Corals not only are absolutely incredible animals, they're beautiful, they're full of cool colors, but they're basically building blocks for everything else that goes on coral reefs. So a coral reef every year, well, all the coral reefs combined every year produce about $6 trillion worth of goods and services, whether that be tourism, fishing, coastal protection. The list goes on and on. And that monetary value is probably way underestimated. Now, the reason that these coral reefs bring so much money into different countries is because people from all over the world want to come see these very unique areas. Each one of these small locations can hold thousands of different organisms, whether it be sharks, whales, turtles, corals, fish, lobsters, and the list goes on and on of what can actually live there. Now, think about a coral like a builder, right? Now, these builders can build a house or an apartment, and the more houses there are, the more fish that can live there, the more turtles that can live there, the more crabs. And because a healthy coral reef can have thousands and thousands of different species and hundreds of thousands of organisms, they're great for fishing. And that provides food for close to 500 million people around the world each year. Now, on top of the food they produce pharmaceuticals, so like medicines. They produce medicine for cancer, Alzheimer's, asthma, heart disease, different infections and viruses. And on top of that, they produce chemicals that are used for contact lenses to keep bacteria from going on it. Now, the reason that they produce all these specific chemicals is because corals are stuck on that rock that they live on, right? And they grow up and they can't move. So to protect themselves from the sun, to protect themselves from other animals, and to provide themselves with the nutrients that they need, they are very good at building chemicals over millions of years, because corals have been around for about 450 million years. Now, the coastal protection that they provide takes away like 95% of all the wave energy. So if you've ever seen a big tsunami wave in a movie, those waves have a lot of energy and power. And if nothing stands in their way, they just come over top of the land and they wipe everything out. So what corals do is they break up that energy. So they basically, it's like putting your hand in the wind. And when the wind hits your hand, it kind of slows it down and it goes around it. Well, all those living structures underwater slow that energy down, and they provide a lot of protection for the coasts of Florida, Australia, everywhere else in the world. Now, one of the big problems is these coral reefs are slowly declining. They've been slowly declining since humans started traveling around the world, putting pollution in the water. But as of recently, since about the 60s or the 70s, coral reefs have declined by almost 50%. Now, this is from a lot of different things. Climate change is one of the biggest ones. With climate change, as everything warms up, the ocean absorbs about 95% of all that heat. Well, when all that heat goes into the ocean, these really sensitive animals that are corals, they don't like it. And what they do is they spit out all of those symbiotic algae, those little guys that live inside of them that help them get energy. And when they have to spit those out, they get bleached. So if you guys look in this picture right here, that super white skeleton is the rock that's underneath and a little bit of skin of what was the coral. But now they have no protection from the sun, and they don't really produce as much food as they used to. So they can either starve or they can get disease, or big waves can come through and they're less strong and they can die in weeks or months. So because of that, global warming is a super bad thing that happens.
Everybody be patient. I think Shane lost connection.
Sorry, guys. Shane's internet was out for a second.
Is it back?
Yeah, it's back.
Okay. Where did you lose me at?
Just after bleaching.
Okay. So the bleaching is a bad thing. The ways we can try to stop that is by thinking about our carbon emissions, the way we travel, ride your bike or the bus if you can. I know you guys are a little young right now, but vote soon for policies that protect our ozone, protect our air, and keep our environment clean and safe. From there, we go to sedimentation. Sedimentation is basically all the dirt and the nutrients that come from the ground. What happens is rainwater washes those into the ocean, or washes those into like rivers and streams, and those can get pushed out on top of coral reefs. And what that does is it smothers them, it covers them up, and then they can't see the sun, and they can't breathe, and then they die. We don't want that to happen either, because we just talked about how important they are. Now, sometimes that sedimentation causes something called eutrophication, which is all these nutrients from farming and other sources wash off into the water and then let algae grow really, really fast. And they suck up all the nutrients in the water, especially the oxygen. And then when they die, they go to the bottom and bacteria eat them up. And what that bacteria does is it uses all the oxygen. So the fish can't breathe. It's called a dead zone. And it's because it's depleted of oxygen. The last two big things that are causing the decline of coral reefs are overfishing, because fish are super important to keep all the algae away. They keep disease off the corals by eating the sick ones and letting the healthy ones survive. And when overfishing happens, it's destructive fishing practices that wipe away all the fish or just go down and they rip up all of the corals. Now, in America, we're getting much better about making rules and regulations on that. And other places around the world are making rules and regulations. But we need to speed it up, because the destruction is going way faster than the rules and regulations that are being put in place. And the last thing is coastal development. And that's another, talking about sedimentation, that's another way for sand to get pushed out onto the reefs and smother them, is basically because when you build something, the sand's got to go somewhere. and there's no longer mangroves, there's no longer trees and grasses that hold all the sand in place, so that sand gets washed back offshore and it covers up the corals. So we don't want that. Those are things that actually our lab specifically works on. We track that sediment movement on top of the coral reefs, and then we report back to the Florida's government to let them know what's going on. Another impact is more local, is trash. So I know we've talked a lot about this just in the news recently, is try to use reusable bags. Don't use so much plastic, whether it be straws or spoons, because if you look at these bags right here, that kind of looks like a jellyfish. And guess what turtles eat? Jellyfish. So things like that, single-use plastics that are, they're not really necessary items. They're just items that make life a little bit easier. Avoiding those things is a step that you guys can do right now at home every single day that'll help you help the environment. And by helping the environment, you help yourself. Now, this is just, I know it's going to be sad, but this is a visual representation of what happens to coral reefs when we don't treat them well. Right here, we have a Christoffel Reef, and here we have Discovery Bay in Jamaica. These are pictures from the 1970s. And in just about 30 years, this one's a little bit longer, but in 30 to 40 years, all of these healthy coral reefs and all of this healthy structure and all of these houses for fish and lobsters and crabs get totally wiped out. And that's over 40 years. But if you look on this side in French Polynesia on the right, in just 3 years, a super healthy coral reef turned into nothing but algae and some low-lying rocks. And when that structure goes away, when those healthy coral reefs are gone, the fish leave too. And when the fish leave, the fishermen can't feed themselves. And when the fishermen can't feed themselves, you have a whole host of other issues that go back to the start. They take it back home with them. And so we're protecting, by protecting the coral reefs, we're protecting families and livelihoods and jobs, and the health of not just the ocean, but people as well.
All right, everybody. I've been trying to keep up with the questions in the chat, but if I missed your question, I'll make sure that we answer it at the end.
I'll get in there, Cassie.
Yeah. Shane just talked about, kind of some threats to coral reefs and why they've been in decline for a while. So one of the big ways that we help these reefs recover is through coral restoration. So this is essentially taking corals and growing them in a more protected environment to then place them back onto the reef where damage might have occurred. That damage can be from the stressors, like Shane said, of kind of global change where corals are just dying off, we're losing different colonies. Or I believe a question was asked, sometimes do boats run onto the reef as well? Occasionally that does happen, but restoration is a really good way to restore those areas where there might have been some damage. So these are just some photos about different types of restoration. So you guys can see here, there's the coral fragments themselves are fairly small when they start, but eventually they'll grow up to a bigger size so then they can be put back onto the reef itself. So there are different structures that we use in restoration, but essentially we're taking coral fragments, little small fragments, growing them in a protected area where we can kind of watch them and monitor them, and then planting them back out onto the reef. So this is kind of just showing you guys how this process starts. So we'll find a larger colony out in the wilds and collect fragments from this colony. Now, this doesn't hurt the coral, it's the larger colony itself. Corals are very good in that they can regrow their tissue pretty quickly and kind of regrow over the area where that fragment has gone. So once we collect those smaller fragments, we place them in what we would call a coral nursery. So this is just an area that's more protected. It's away from some human impacts, away from a lot of areas where there might be a lot of boat traffic, generally in an area that's a little more protected. So you aren't going to get a lot of storm damage on these fragments as well. And we can hang them in this picture, if you guys can see on the top right. This is called a coral tree. So these little fragments are actually hung from little PVC on some fishing line. Shane's actually going to show you guys, if you can see on his screen, what a structure looks like. So once the corals are kind of placed on that tree, they're happy as can be. They'll just sit and float in the water column. They'll just start growing and growing. And once they've reached a pretty larger size, they can then be put back out onto the reef. So this is just a way for us to kind of grow things fairly quickly in a more protected space. I like to think of it as kind of a garden that someone might have at home. So you want to make sure that in your garden, you're growing different things. But while you're growing different things, you're kind of watching, making sure your, weeds aren't growing on top of your plants that you want to look at, kind of the same way that scientists would do in a nursery. So scientists will go out and clean different things. They'll take measurements on the sizes of the corals to track them, make sure they aren't looking unhealthy, so they aren't bleaching, they don't look like they have any predators, preying on them, kind of all these things to watch and make sure that the corals are happy and healthy and that they're growing.
I was muted. So once we grow these corals to a nice healthy size, what we do is we go out on the reef and we look where they historically used to live. And then we go say, okay, what looks like a good place on the reef that we could plant these, that doesn't have a bunch of disease, that doesn't look like it's got a bunch of sand that would cover it up. And then what we do is we go clean off the ground a little bit. And then we basically use like a glue or a clay called epoxy. And then we mix it all up and we put it down with the corals on top of it. And then sometimes we use zip ties. Sometimes we use nails or even wire. And what we do is we hold them down, and then maybe 2-3 weeks, the corals will slowly actually connect to that rock. And then over a long period of time, they'll actually grow onto the substrate, which is what we call just like the ocean floor. Once they grow from there, they start getting bigger and bigger, and then we leave them alone and let them do their thing. And then they, with the sun, they grow, get bigger, and then we have what you would call a restored reef. So if you look on this side, this is right after an outplant. So an outplant's when we go take them and put them on the reef. And then this picture on this side is about 2 years afterwards. So if you see, you can see the same rock and the same soft corals in the background. But on the left, you have no fish. On the right, you have a bunch of different grunts down here. And then you have a triggerfish right here. So what happens when we restore these reefs is not only do we restore the structure, but we bring back fish, we bring back lobsters, we bring back other organisms that would previously live there. But when they didn't have any protection from predators or the waves, they moved away. So now you can see that just in a small area over a couple of years, our impact has not only made the reef look prettier, it's made it healthier, and it's brought back a lot of fish. Now, I do want to say that this is a very small scale. When we do these reef restorations, we can only affect so much of a place. And if those stressors that we talked about earlier are still there, all of our hard work can get wiped away. So even though restoring the reef is super important, stopping those impacts from humans is the most important. So remember, don't use single-use plastic if you don't have to. Recycle, ride your bike if you can. Again, when you get older, vote. But think about, the coral reefs every day, because they really do impact your life every day, whether or not you think about it, whether it be the medicine that you use, the fish you eat, or the cool pictures and documentaries you watch on Netflix. So with that being said, I'm going to pull up a video really quickly. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen on this one. And I'm going to pull up a video. Now, it might be a little laggy, and I'm very sorry, but there's people on Zoom, so it is might be a little hard. But I worked with it earlier, and it did well. Where is this at? And if you guys want to ask any questions while I get this going, that is totally fine.
Was the coral that and then replant. Was it that you showed us the pictures? Was that staghorn coral?
Yes, it was. Right.
Do you think that people will die if every single coral disappears?
Well, not at first, but if they all do, if all the corals on this planet die, it's not just the corals that are dying, because there's a lot of other bad things that are going on in the world. So the air we breathe is probably going to be a lot worse, and the sun's going to be a lot brighter. The temperature is going to be a lot warmer. So coral reefs are a good indicator of overall planet health. So yes, yes and no is the best way to put that.
What about the parrotfish?
Parrotfish, I'm glad you brought parrotfish up. Parrotfish are super important. Did you know that most sand comes from parrotfish? It's parrotfish poop.
Yeah.
So all the beaches we walk on are actually fish poop. Parrotfish are super important. They're a good indicator. And because of that, what happens is when we protect them, we in turn protect the reefs themselves. All right, this is not gonna work. All right, guys, I'm trying for the video, but it's not working. So what we'll do for now is we will open it up for any questions you guys have, and I'm gonna keep on working on it for a couple minutes. I don't know what's going on.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, you can.
Do sharks need coral?
Yes, actually, sharks are super, super important for coral reefs, and coral reefs are super important for them. So all of the fish that sharks eat, for the most part, come from coral reefs. There's a few pelagic species, which means they live out in the deep blue, but most sharks live around reefs. So without the coral reefs, the sharks couldn't eat. But at the same time, sharks eat all the fish that are sick or dying or diseased. And because of that, they keep the fish populations healthy. And what they do is they keep populations at a good size. So if there's one type of fish that was just everywhere and no sharks ate it, they would take up all the nutrients and all the resources that the other sharks or the other fish would use. So imagine if there was a billion of you living in America and then there's no sharks to eat you. You would fill up every single house. You'd fill up every single road. The traffic would be awful, and it wouldn't be cool. So what the sharks do is they regulate how many fish are on the reef and what kind of fish are on the reef, and it keeps everybody in order.
With coral reefs, the dolphins?
Dolphins also live around coral reefs. Dolphins don't live around reefs as much as sharks do because they like to move around more, but they still rely on them for fish. They still rely on them for food. And we rely on dolphins because dolphins are awesome. I love dolphins.
Me too.
So yeah, dolphins also use coral reefs to find food, as well as keep them healthy and under control for all their fish populations.
No more questions.
I think we had a question in the chat of how can you tell if a coral is healthy or sick? So there's a few ways that you can tell if a coral is healthy or sick. Like Shane mentioned earlier, if a coral is bleached, so if it looks really, really pale and really, really white and doesn't have a lot of that algae, which gives it its color anymore, that's a good indicator that the coral isn't very happy. So when that happens, essentially, it's like if you guys had a fever, your body's not going to be very happy. Your temperature is going to be really high. The coral feels the same way. They're too hot from the sun, from the ocean temperatures, and essentially they get rid of everything else, all the algae in their body, and just focus on their own tissue. And sometimes that can lead to the coral death. So if you see just like a very bare white skeleton of coral, that's a good indicator that the coral isn't very happy. Some species of corals also can change their color very abruptly and can kind of fluoresce a little bit, get really, really bright. Only for a few species, but sometimes that's also an indicator that the coral isn't healthy either when they change their color like that. So there's a few different ways that scientists can tell. Sometimes the coral won't show any outward signs that it's unhappy, and sometimes it's more of a chemical thing. But there's a lot of research going into, bleaching and kind of disease work and trying to see what is affecting coral colonies and how can we kind of help.
Doesn't it don't when they bleach, doesn't it mean that they like are asking for help?
Yeah, a little bit. So when they bleach, they're just really, really unhappy and they're really, really hot. So sometimes if the temperature goes back down, some coral colonies that had bleach will recover. But other times, if something stays hot for really, really long, it can actually kill a coral colony. So kind of the same way, if we had a fever for like, a very, very long time, we would need to go to like the hospital to maybe get some help, get something to help, replenish fluids, kind of hydrate us again. The same way with the coral. Sometimes you have to lower the temperature to make sure that the coral can kind of regain its health, get healthy again, and kind of be happy.
So like that's a great thing for you guys. So when the coral's bleaching, it's a great thing for you guys, so you guys can know.
It's not. I wouldn't say it's a great thing, because usually by that point it means we might not be able to do a ton. If the coral is like really, really pale and really white. But if the coral is starting to go a little pale and the coral is in like a laboratory or something, that can sometimes be an indicator that maybe we need to lower the water temperature. Maybe we need to check our nutrients and see what's going on within a tank to see if it can help. Out in the wild, there's not necessarily a ton that we can do, especially if it's a coral that's on the reef itself. The other option would be to take the coral itself and move it somewhere else, move it somewhere where the water's a little cooler. But sometimes, with the bleaching stuff, if it's over a really large, wide area, we just kind of have to watch it and observe it and see if maybe the seasons, if it's, at the end of the summer, if the water temperature goes back down, that maybe the corals will recover. Do we have any other questions? I think we covered everybody's questions from in the chat. But does anyone have any other questions that they want to ask?
I'll ask.
I'm good.
So when you go and harvest the coral and you put them in farms, you basically just clip the coral off. So say if you had a hurricane and coral was broken off, does it automatically regenerate if it's broken? Or, once it's broken by a storm, is that it?
Yeah. So for the branching species, so the staghorn coral that you guys pointed out earlier and elkhorn coral, they actually also can sometimes reproduce by fragmentation. So they will break off naturally, and then that fragment will reattach to the reef and start to grow the colony again. So that's kind of a natural process for the branching corals that we have in the Caribbean. For some of the boulder species, it can be kind of hard because they're larger and they're bigger. So sometimes damage to those species, they might regrow and, recover. But for the branching species, that's a natural function. So sometimes when a storm has come through and there's fragments kind of around our nursery, we can also rehang the nursery, the fragments in the nursery, so they have a better chance of survival. Because sometimes those fragments, if they're still kind of rolling around on the bottom, near the bottom of the ocean, they sometimes don't do very well either if they get buried by sand or other things come and kind of eat at them, or algae starts to grow on them. So sometimes we can help, some coral fragments out by putting them in the nursery itself. But that is a natural process that the branching species do.
All right, guys, I'm going to see if I can get this video to work. I'm pulling out all the stops. If not, I don't know if I don't think it's gonna work. But hold on for just 1 second. We'll let it load. Is it all choppy right now, Cassie?
Yes.
Okay. I'm gonna let it load for a second and hope it works. Because this is the only way I could get to it. But back to that question we just asked about the fragmentation. My favorite thing about these branching corals, the ones that we grow on the trees, is say you've got a cut on your hand, right? Or on your arm or something. You start to get a scab and then it heals back up. But if you didn't have a cut, you wouldn't just start growing skin there randomly. So that's basically how these corals work, is when they feel the stress of breaking, or when we put them in the nursery, something inside of them says, okay, we need to fix that. And then they heal rapidly. And because of that rapid healing, it's rapid growth. So when we cut them, the fragmentation itself stimulates them to grow faster. And that's why we're so successful in our nursery and growing these corals, but also in nature. When a storm sends them flying somewhere else, what they do is they go, oh, time to start growing more. And then they connect to wherever they're at. So they stop moving and they get nice and big, and they wait for the next storm, and so on and so forth. So a lot of these coral colonies that we have can move around across the reef because of different weather conditions or from different storms. So we're gonna try this again. Oh, I don't know. Guys, I don't know if it's gonna work.
It's still pretty choppy, Shane.
It's super choppy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just let it
Darn.
go.
Well, I'm
Sorry,
sorry,
guys.
guys. I was hoping it was gonna work.
Can you
No,
send
it was fine. It was fine for me.
Was it?
Yeah.
Can you send the link to the video? Do you have it?
I can
work for me.
try. It did,
Like
or
it
it
was
didn't?
very hard.
Very laggy.
Super laggy. Yeah.
We might be able to send it to you guys.
Yeah, I can try. I can try to send it to you guys. I had it downloaded on my computer, but for whatever reason, it didn't want to. It didn't want to share
Quick question.
because it's this many people. Yeah, what's up?
How about if you like put the video, even though it's laggy or not, you tell everybody what's happening? Because if they can see it, maybe you
Okay.
can mute the thing.
All right, I like that. That's a good.
Just a little laggy for me. Just a little laggy though.
problem solving. All right, guys.
It wasn't, I couldn't, it was just frozen for me.
Okay. So what I'll do is I'll kind of fast forward. So we ride the boats out every day. And so when we ride the boats out, we go to specific places out on the reef. And then once we get there, we do this, which is we throw a line in, and that marks exactly where we're supposed to be, because everything we do is very particular on the reef itself, right? Everything's got to be in a specific location. We see jellyfish all the time. Basically what we do is the divers go underwater. We use different things, different tools.
Sorry, guys, having some technical difficulties.
Same exact place every year for 10 years. And that way we can actually understand what's, oh, am I freezing again?
You're fine now. You were frozen for a minute.
Okay, so we take pictures of the same place year after year, and that tells us what's actually going on in these specific locations around our reefs. Right here, you actually have, we have Cassie right here, and what she's doing is she has a transect square, right? So this long tape measure is a transect, which just means a specific location of a specific length. And then we use these quadrats, which are just big squares, to measure a very specified area. And then we count what's in there. We measure how big it is. We say how many there are, if they have conditions, if they look sick, if they look healthy, if there's, if fish are eating them. So that's where we get a lot of our data, our information of what's going on underwater. So there's Nick swimming around with them. There's some cool stuff we see. Right there, this is a stick we use it's called a sed stick. So you measure the sediment. So you stab it into the sand and you say, okay, it's 2 centimeters deep or it's 30 centimeters deep. And when we do that, we can say over time how deep the sediment's been in the same exact spot. So we can measure how the sand moves. And with that, we tell the government, hey, you guys did beach renourishment in this particular area, and the sand has moved out over the reef, or it hasn't, over the last year or 2 years or so on and so forth. That's pretty much what's in here. Everything else was kind of cool videos of fish and underwater creatures for you guys to see, what we kind of see on a regular basis. But because it's so laggy, it's not going to really give you guys a good understanding of what's going on.
Do we have another question?
I think Yuli has a
Yep.
question.
Go ahead, Yuli.
My question is, do specific fish need specific like corals?
Good question. I don't know exactly off the top of my head, but I know a lot of fish like juvenile or larvae, so they're really small fish. They really like the branching corals because then they can hide in between the branches and hide from predators. Whereas some of the larger fish, kind of like the big boulder colonies and other species, they like to just kind of be around those types of corals for the same reason. If a larger fish swims by, they can duck behind things or hide behind other areas. So a lot of different fish species rely on corals, either for habitat or for other places to hide from other predators. That's a good question.
I have a question for everybody. So Cassie and Shane, what did you go to school for? What's your majors? And so if somebody wants to dive in the ocean every day and help, restore coral reefs, what would they have to study in school?
That's a good question. Cassie, you want to go first?
Sure, yeah. So my undergraduate was in just basic biology, and then I just finished my master's degree in marine science. So if you guys, there are kind of different avenues to get to being a marine biologist. I lived in a different state, so I didn't have access to the ocean when I was younger. So that's why I did biology in undergrad. But you guys, if you live in Florida, you have access to some really cool programs that are directly in marine science as an undergrad. So that's a cool way, cool access that you guys have here in Florida. Go ahead, Jane.
So I'm in the same boat, kind of as Cassie. I am from Ohio originally. There's not very much ocean in Ohio. So when I was in grade school and high school, I loved science. I loved the science fair. So I took every biology class that I could. And then when I went to college, I found a college that had a marine biology degree where it was focused mainly in tanks. So I used aquariums a lot. And because of that, I took an opportunity to study abroad. So I lived in Australia for a while. And that was really when I got this amazing experience of the ocean, saw everything, just loved every bit of it. And when I came back, I came to NSU. I moved down to Florida, and I joined the CRRAM Lab, and I am currently doing my master's. When it comes to the diving aspect, there's a whole host of different ways you can get in the water, whether it be snorkeling or getting, when you get a little bit older, you can get that diving certification, and then you can do it on your own. But you could come to Nova and then join a lab that goes diving every day, and then you can do what we do. I think it's one of the coolest things ever. There's also different programs at different universities. There's different jobs where they will hire you to be a diver. So you don't just have to be a research diver for corals. but I think that's the coolest one. Anybody else have any other questions they want to ask? Whether it be about coral reefs or diving or cool, crazy things.
I'm 9 years old and I'm like constantly like wondering how old do I have to be to dive?
So that's a good question. I'm 9 years old, so I think right now you can do something called bubble makers, and that's through Patty, the dive organization. So it basically lets you go in the water to about 30 feet with an instructor next to you. And then you can kind of start practicing. And then once you're 12, you can start actually getting a dive certification for pretty shallow. And then I think it's 16, Cassie, maybe, that you can really start to dive. But don't think that the only way you can get in the water and see the coral reefs is by diving. The coolest thing you can do, the cheapest thing and the easiest thing is snorkeling. All you need is a mask and a tube to breathe some air. That's how I started when I was like 6 years old in the Caribbean. And you can see in these shallow areas, you can see everything you would see when you were scuba diving, and you don't have to wear some crazy stuff on your back.
I'd imagine you could just like do this PVC pipe makeshift thing and then just like some normal goggles and then.
Yeah, no, I think that's the most surf skate science thing I've ever heard. Making your own PVC snorkel. But yeah, no, you can do that. There's all kinds of ways. You could just have, regular pool goggles and go up and take a big deep breath and then go swim under. So that's definitely something you guys could do. Or maybe for Christmas, if it's coming up this year, ask for some fins and your first snorkel and your mask, and then have your parents take you down to the Keys one weekend and just force them, be like, hey, I want to go to the Keys and I want to see some coral reefs and I want to see some fish. And I'm sure they want to go down there too, because who doesn't like a vacation to the Keys, right?
I go down there all the time.
There you go.
My mom refuses to go past her waist, even in the pool. I'm like, Mother, I'm 9 and I'm more willing to go in the water than you. What your problem?
So Aiden, where do you live? Is my question.
Palm Beach Gardens, Florida.
Okay, so Phil Foster Park. You know where Phil Foster is on Blue Heron? That big bridge that goes over to the beach? That's
We've on Blue Heron Bridge before.
Yeah, that's a great place to go snorkeling. You'll see all kinds of stuff there.
A lot of people really like diving underneath that bridge. There's a lot of cool stuff that you can see.
I've only been to the Key like once in my life.
All right, I have a question for all you guys now, because you guys got to ask all the questions. What do you think the coolest thing in the ocean is?
I used to think stingrays, but now I think dolphins, sharks, and other dangerous animals.
I like that.
I think the coolest thing
and stuff like hurricanes, because we did sort of like a science fair thing, and it sounded very exciting. Also scary. Mostly scary.
Anybody else got a favorite animal underwater?
Well, I think the coolest thing about the ocean is just the mysteries of
Shark.
the deep sea. I think that's the coolest thing. It's just the mysteries of the deep sea.
I like that answer. That's a good answer. And Jason, you said sharks. Do you have a favorite shark?
I gotta go for the megalodon, even though it's extinct.
Hey, the ocean's deep. There might still be one hanging out down there. We don't know.
Might not be true.
Oh, well, yeah, but it's
we've only discovered, we've only discovered
that could be possible.
5% of the ocean.
Even though it's
Something
extinct,
that could be possible.
Yeah, there's still 95% of the ocean left to explore.
Actually, everyone explored the ocean, actually.
No, the ocean's actually largely unexplored. We only have about 5 to 7% of it.
Yeah, but I think mostly the last things that are left from megalodons is just their fossils.
Probably, yeah. They're definitely in the fossil record as extinct. But I like to hope that deep down somewhere. They've been able to hide out from humans, and one day we might see one.
And then they just create a bunker.
Exactly.
A shark bunker.
I don't think they can do that.
My favorite animal is probably a shark, because there was a really cool one called the frilled shark, if you've ever heard of that. Called a frilled shark. I think it just went extinct though. Maybe there's still a couple left.
I mean, the helicoprion's really cool with that like wheel of teeth.
So sharks, I'm getting a lot of people like sharks in the ocean.
Yeah.
All right, let's see. You have your hand up again?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
What was it called again? It was a jellyfish that can like live forever, kind of.
Ooh.
It's like the soulstone, the one that has like this stone and it's
The ones that just keep on going the life cycle from baby to there to there to there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Talking about? Yeah.
But I forgot what it's called. I learned it recently, so I thought it was really cool.
Maybe you're thinking of the immortal jellyfish, because whenever it gets scared, it's just like, and then it's just like a teeny tiny baby again.
Let me just.
Right,
it's really cool because it looks like algae when it starts growing, like weird algae stuff.
Jonas, did you have your hand up?
Yes.
Go ahead.
About the megalodon thing, some parts of the ocean that are just too deep that people can't go all the way down to the bottom might have megalodons or some other kind of animal.
Like the Mariana Trench.
There might be some other animals there.
You know the darkness where you go deep down. It's actually what I like to call it. It's called the void. It's kind of a weird name, but it's basically a deep down place where those are all the dark animals, such as like anglerfish. And I don't think that the sharks are down there. But if you think about it, maybe those kind of sharks can look around in the darkness, but I don't know. I think they don't go in that darkness. I don't think they can have those
Maybe
kind of
in the midnight zone. They might be in the midnight zone.
I know what's the name of the immortal jellyfish. It's the Medusa Turritopsis. Something like that. That's what the name of it is.
I mean, there is goblin sharks that live way down.
I don't think that's an actual shark.
Those have like some extendable nose thing.
I don't think that there's a thing called a goblin shark. I don't know. I'll research it.
They have to do research. And then they like shoot out really fast, and they just like retract it.
I don't know.
Definitely do your own research. I encourage you guys to watch some documentaries on Netflix.
I watch so much documentaries because I'm super obsessed with marine biology.
Have you watched My Octopus Teacher?
I haven't yet. No. Is it good? Have you seen it?
It's really sad and funny.
Okay.
I've watched it.
I'm going to watch it.
So I'm gonna let them go ahead and wrap up. So I'm gonna put everybody on mute real quick. And I put in there, somebody in the chat was talking about learning how to be an astronaut. And so a lot of astronauts train in the deep ocean, like you're saying. So I told you in the chat, if you saw, Disney Plus has a really cool video called Aliens of the Deep that you might want to check out. It's really neat. The video is amazing, and you can see everything that lives deep down there. But Cassie and Shane, we really appreciate you two for being here. And then, and if you all want to study marine biology or get into a career like this, Nova is right here in South Florida. They have a great building right by the water with their research boats that you can check out. And I have one more question for you. So you both said, Cassie, I think you said you're from Ohio?
That was Shane. I'm from Michigan originally.
And Cassie's from Michigan. So being from Michigan and Ohio, what made you want to study marine biology? That's my last question for you.
So growing up, I grew up around the Great Lakes in Michigan. So I actually got into marine biology through scuba diving. first. So I started diving before I kind of decided that I wanted to go into marine biology. But, you know, growing up around water, it was really a great way to be kind of introduced to water ecosystems. And then as I kind of, you know, got into undergraduate and college, learning about kind of all the organisms that live in the ocean, and just kind of the variety of things that live in the ocean, made me more and more interested. So that's how I got started.
So I actually got started kind of the opposite of Cassie. Even though I was from Ohio, my dad's side of the family was from Aruba. So every other summer I was down in the Caribbean, snorkeling and messing around on the beach since I can remember. And I think what really got me into marine biology was we went to this place called the Palm Islands, and you could snorkel. They had coral reefs and they had these really bright blue parrotfish, and they were everywhere. And I went back, you know, every other year for 10, 15 years. And every year I went back, there was less and less of these parrotfish. You know, the coral reefs looked worse and worse. And it was something that I could see happen in my personal life that I did not like. And at the same time, I knew that other people might not be able to see it. And that's when I started researching it. But I could see the impacts would affect everybody. And because of that and my scientific, the scientific brain that I have, that's what I like to study in school. I put 2 and 2 together and I was like, all right, how can I play in the water my whole life? And that's kind of how I came up with the whole marine biology thing. So when I was in high school, I started looking at all kinds of colleges and what I could study and what kind of jobs I could do. And then from there, it just took off. Went to a college, went to a grad school, and now I'm here, going on a boat every day or most days, going underwater and telling the government and other organizations what's going on, how they can help, how we as a country and a whole world can help. And I think that's kind of how I got into this position right now on Zoom talking to you guys.
So I think we have one more question. It looks like Yuli raising your hand. I'm gonna ask. Do you have a question?
I need to get going. I have a birthday today, so.
No problem.
So bye.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
Okay. So I guess my last thing to close up is gonna be, what can the students that are on the call do to help our reefs locally here in Florida? Are there a couple tips you can give them before we at their age? What can they do?
Yeah, I think one of the big things is plastic waste and kind of littering. If you guys make sure whenever you're out somewhere that you're taking care of your own trash, making sure it gets put in the proper trash receptacle. If you can avoid using other single-use plastics, I think Shane mentioned this earlier, of just making sure, we just want to make sure that stuff doesn't end up in landfills and then out on the ocean. That's a really big one that you can do kind of just personally as a human. And then other things like trying to save as much water as you can. So, turning off the faucet when you're brushing your teeth, making sure you're not using too much water if you're hand washing dishes, little things like that where you can kind of conserve as much water and energy as you can. You guys are pretty young right now, so you don't have access to some of the other things that maybe an adult can do. But just, making sure to also appreciate nature as well. Visit your parks and other public areas where you can go on walks and, take photos. Make sure, you're watching your impact on the places that you go. Taking only photos, leaving only footprints is kind of the thing that a lot of people say, to make sure we're just kind of watching how we are interacting with our environment. Shane, I don't know if you have anything else you want to add to that.
Yeah, I'll just add just a little bit to it. My personal way of of helping every day, as I like to say, every time I go to the beach, I always bring hand sanitizer and a trash bag, and that way, when I walk up and down the beach, when I see a straw or somebody else's trash, or anything like that does not belong there, I'll do a quick walk. Sometimes it'll be a mile, sometimes it'll be 10 feet. But I like to pick up the trash that's on the beach because I don't know if it came from the ocean or if it's going to go out in the ocean. And I don't like seeing trash on the beach. Nobody does, because that's not where it belongs. So that's just a little thing you can do, with your parents. If you go to a beach day and you get to enjoy the beach for the day, that's fantastic. Do your part to help that beach a little bit and pick up a little bit of trash here and there. And I think another thing that we really talked about was educate yourself, watch documentaries. Blue Planet and Blue Planet 2 are like my favorite things in the world. Watching those is the coolest thing ever. And if you want to be able to see one of those kind of things, one of those, phenomenal congregations of dolphins, something like that. If you want to be able to see that someday in the future, think about that future. Think about telling other people about that future. I know you guys talked about all of your favorite sharks and animals. Keep on researching that. Get so much knowledge that it just spews out of your ears. And every time you see somebody, just tell them about it. Because I think that's one of the biggest problems for me is so many people don't know the amazing things that go on in the ocean. And luckily, we're starting you guys young. We taught you about coral reefs and all that stuff today. Keep that energy. Keep that forward momentum. Learn every day. Teach everybody every day, and just be an advocate for the ocean, because that's really what it needs right now. The ocean is the most incredible thing in the world. It produces 50 to 80% of all the oxygen we breathe, half the food, half the medicine. But because people can't see past that surface, sometimes people think it's just some scary thing where sharks live. But the ocean is so much more than that. And I think spreading awareness about everything in the ocean is the most important thing that you guys can do right now, because kids really are the future. And I'm looking at you with the eyes right there. But that's it from me when it comes to that kind of stuff.
Well, Cassie and Shane, we really, really appreciate your time. Thank you so much. And definitely we learned a lot. So keep doing what you're doing. And we look forward to seeing how you make a difference here in South Florida on our reefs. We're excited. So thank you.
Thank you guys for having us.
Everybody can unmute and say bye if you want.
I just wanted to say bye. I just wanted to say since we're talking.
Bye.
I just wanted to say since we were talking about Netflix, have y'all ever seen Nailed It?
I want you guys to play. I love you guys. I'll see you around, I guess.
Bye.
See you, Jason.
Bye,
Take care,
everybody.
everybody. Take care, guys.
Bye.
I'm actually gonna stay until the meeting is ended.
Bye.